What's up, everybody? My name is Scott Waters. Welcome to No Life Till Metal. Today I'm going to be doing a 70s edition of albums that define heavy metal. I'm going to be very clear this time that this is 1970s albums only, not 80s, not 90s, not 60s, albums that define heavy metal. In my last video series I did two parts of 1980s albums that define traditional heavy metal, and I really appreciated all the comments everybody got. But I got a lot of comments from people like, I can't believe you didn't include Rainbow Rising, I can't believe you didn't include Black Sabbath, Master of Reality. Okay, but I was trying to keep it to 80s albums only, and I really told the people that I polled that I wanted 79 through 90, nothing else, because I was even those people I was polling was giving me albums from like 78 and after. It just was odd. So this one I was very clear with everybody I polled. So again, I polled 40 different people and I told them pick one album that defines heavy metal from 1970s, from that, you know, era of heavy metal, one album, and I got 40 different answers. Several of people picked the same ones. So part two is going to be the list from those people, those 40 people that include, and I have a list right here of different people that that picked. So I got Tanner Poppet from Madras, and Louis St. August from Mass, and who else on here that people would know? Oh, Roddy Dunsmore from Devastation, Manny Castillo from Paradox, Steve Gaines from Avatar and Anger is Art, Glenn Rogers from Helix and Hyrax. Those are the kind of people that I polled. So either metal musicians or people that I consider metal experts, and I asked them for their opinion. One album. And the first part of this video is going to be my 10 plus my top 10 albums that define heavy metal for the 1970s. I'm going to start with 4 runners-up that I really struggled to keep this thing to 10. And I had 20 at one time, so I pared it down to 14. So we're going to put the 10 in order, and then we have these 4 that I'm going to show quickly that are just kind of runners-up that I can't believe aren't in my list. But Nazareth, Dan McCafferty has that gravelly voice that I don't know, that became a staple in heavy metal from years to come. But Nazareth was a little bit weird in that they put out a heavy album like this, or say Razum and Naz, and then he put out a softer album afterwards. Then they come out with another heavy album, so they were kind of all over the map. But that was kind of the thing with heavy metal in the 70s. It wasn't so defined where, you know, a heavy metal band couldn't do a funk song or couldn't put in a jazz part or a blues section. You know, there was a lot more variety in the style in the 70s. But yeah, even the cover on this one looks like almost like an 80s heavy metal cover. So Nazareth, Hair of the Dog. The title track's been covered by more metal bands than I can even say. Can't believe this band didn't make it in my top 10. One of my all-time favorites, but this is Kiss. I went with Hotter Than Hell. I could have gone with anything pretty much through Kiss Alive too, but I went with this one just because the song Parasite is so brutally heavy for the year this came out. What was this, like 1974? I mean, you know, Sabbath had the slow, dirty, gritty sound, but this is more upbeat and more, you know, precise picking. It's almost more standard heavy metal like you would expect in the 80s, a song like Parasite. But then you've got also deep cuts on this album that are just so fantastic, like Ace's Strange Ways and Mainline. You've got dark songs like Going Blind and classics like Got to Choose, and of course the title track. So I mean, again, Kiss, there's no denying that their stage show, their look, you know, the whole leather and spikes and makeup was something that was adopted by tons of heavy metal bands from, you know, the 70s to this day. I couldn't decide which album to pick by this band. I could have gone with any from the 70s, the Michael Schenker era of UFO. Again, I can't believe I don't have UFO in my top 10, but there's just so much to choose from. It was such a great era for heavy metal and hard rock, and UFO forced it. Michael Schenker's guitar playing, you know, inspired decades of music to come. Phil Mogg just had those very charismatic vocals, great heavy songs, big hooks, you know, a pounding rhythm section with Pete Way and Andy Parker on drums. Yeah, can't say enough good things. This one really was tough for me not to put in my top 10. It's more of a personal favorite, and I know people argue till they're blue in the face that this band is not heavy metal and never was, and whatever. I really don't give a crap what other people say, but Aerosmith rocks. In 1976 when this came out, this was heavy. A song like Sick as a Dog or Nobody's Fault or Combination or Last Child, those are all heavy songs, especially for 76. Again, with the exception of maybe Sabbath and Judas Priest, nobody was really doing music quite as heavy as this was back then. This has always been one of my favorite Aerosmith records, and I think it's because of that overall heaviness. The whole album pretty much is heavy from front to back, with the exception of the very last track, which is a ballad called Home Tonight. Again, you also have that dual guitar thing going on, something that was a standard in heavy metal. You got Tyler's raspy vocals. And alright, I'm going to get into my top 10 now. This first band, number 10, was kind of the one that I was going back and forth with the Aerosmith as to which one should be at number 10, but ultimately I couldn't leave out this live album from Thin Lizzy. I mean, from the look of the band, I mean, look at Phil Lynott there. I mean, that's just that's a metal pose, it's a metal look. You've got the whole leather and spiked wristbands and spiked belts, and I mean, that's a look of metal. The sound was also metal. They captured something here that they couldn't quite capture in the studio with that raw, heavy energy that just couldn't quite be captured in the studio previous to this album. And also you got that dual leads, you know, dual guitar sound became a staple of heavy metal, especially power metal into the 80s and 90s, but also, you know, think of bands like Iron Maiden. I mean, they really took that Thin Lizzy sound and ran with it. And of course there was other bands like Judas Priest and Wishbone Ash and whatnot that also had that dual guitar lead, but really Thin Lizzy kind of had that sound that really took that dual guitar thing to the next level, and it became a staple in heavy metal, you know, from bands like, even bands like Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, and bands like Fate's Warning. There was tons of bands that used that dual guitar sound in the future. Number 9, one of those bands people will argue with you that were never heavy metal, but there could not have been a new wave of British heavy metal if there wasn't a first wave of British heavy metal. The first wave of British heavy metal included the band Deep Purple, and Machine Head has always been one of my favorite albums. One of those heavies from the early 70s. What was it, 72, something like that? A different kind of heavy than, say, a Black Sabbath. You know, Black Sabbath were more, their sound heaviness came from that guitar sound, whereas Black Sabbath, I mean, Deep Purple sound came more of a mixture of that really grungy organ sound mixed with the you know, the guitar antics of Ritchie Blackmore and the screaming, you know, the banshee screams of Ian Gillan. I mean, one of the greatest heavy metal vocalists of all time. Just listen to the work he did on Black Sabbath's Born Again. I mean, the guy can sing, but he can also scream like a banshee. Incredible vocalist, incredible album. In my opinion, one of the greats. If you buy the CD reissue from several years ago, there's an essay in there, and it talks about how, you know, this was one of the very first heavy metal albums, and I would agree. Another one of those bands that people will argue with me was never heavy metal. Again, I really don't care what people think. I was there. I remember it. I was part of that scene. Another live album. This is Ted Nugent Double Live Gonzo. Again, from the look of Nugent with the leather gauntlets and the long hair and the stage antics, the feedback, the heavy guitars, everything about you know, what I think of when I think of 70s heavy metal, Nugent had. Again, even this is the original hype sticker from the album, and there's a quote on here from Sounds Magazine that said, "The Madman's Band is the greatest gonzoid heavy metal outfit to be found anywhere but anywhere on the whole belligerent planet." So there you go. Even Sounds Magazine from 1977 or 78 when that was written agrees with me. So Ted Nugent Double Live Gonzo, just over the top energy, heaviness, everything you would expect from, you know, that 70s heavy metal sound. Really, name another artist that was doing something quite like that in 1970s. You know, that just feedback-filled guitar sound that that NUGENT had. You know, it was fairly unique, and not a whole lot of people were doing that. Kind of late in the 70s for this next one, but I doubt anybody will disagree with this one. This is number 7. This is Overkill by Motorhead, featuring of course, the double bass Filthy Phil Taylor on the title track. Motorhead kind of combined the sound of the 70s punk sound with the hard rock sound, combining something, making something fresh and unique. You know, these guys don't sound like any of the artists that I've shown beforehand, but still, when you think of pure 70s heavy metal, Motorhead was one of the first bands that came to mind for me. Obviously, it was in my top 10. So number 7, Motorhead, Filthy Phil Taylor, fantastic drummer. You've got Fast Eddie Clarke, whose guitar licks were second to none, and then of course you've got Lemmy, who had that overdriven bass sound, that just raw, nasty Rickenbacker bass sound, and of course his gravelly vocals that would become a standard for a lot of metal in the 80s, and especially in the 90s and forward. Probably a lesser known band, kind of a band that I didn't know in the 70s. I got introduced to this band in the 80s, thanks to Metallica, but BUDGIE. I went with In for the Kill. Really could have gone for any of their 70s albums. Much like a lot of the other 70s bands, you know, the sound is up and down. They kind of weave and paint a musical tapestry that's not just straightforward, heavy all the time. That was the thing about 70s metal bands, is they weren't constrained to having to do this one thing. You know, they couldn't. You can't do ballads. You can't do this. You can't do funk. You can't do. You can't have blues parts. You can't put jazz interludes. And these bands could. All these bands did. You know, they didn't have one particular sound, and their albums were never samey, like a lot of the bands you hear now. You know, I love thrash metal, and so don't get me wrong when I say this, but there's a lot of thrash bands where the album from front to back, it sounds the same. It has a very similar vibe all the way through. You know, it beats you over the head with a wall of sound. That's not the case here. You got heavy songs, but you've also got more melodic moments. You got more organic moments. It's a little bit of everything. It's like I said, it kind of a musical tapestry that's painted. But this album actually has Crash Course from Brain Surgery, which of course Metallica covered. They didn't change it all that much, but you could just tell how heavy of a song it was just from them playing it. But this was back in what, 1974. This was heavy. This is heavy metal. Again, another one of those first wave of British heavy metal bands, as is the next one. When I did my 80s video, several people picked this one. Again, I told all those people, you know, if I had been doing, you know, a more broader spectrum than just the 80s, I would have picked this one as well. But that was an 80s video. This is a 70s video, therefore Rainbow Rising, featuring the mighty Ronnie James Dio, one of the metal icons of not only the 70s but the 80s and the 90s. Ronnie James Dio, you know, to me is just one of those iconic vocalists with Bruce Dickinson and Rob Halford, and you know, that just, you know, the upper echelons of heavy metal vocalists. And of course, much like the Deep Purple I showed earlier, you've got the guitar antics of Richie Blackmore, but you've got Kazi Powell on here, who of course would go on to play with many different bands, including Black Sabbath. Jimmy Bain, who would go on to play with Dio and his solo band. So yeah, this is just a fantastic album. Very much a precursor to what would become power metal. You know, it's that kind of fantasy-based lyrics and epic kind of music. There's no doubt, Rainbow Rising, one of the defining albums of 1970s heavy metal. This one is a band's second album, came out at the very tail end of the 70s, so I'm really kind of pushing it with this one. Almost went with their first album, but this one just, I think, really, the first album was more of a hard rock album. Didn't quite have the metal edge that NARITA has, in my opinion. Riot's NARITA, American band, of course. Riot was kind of an honorary new wave of British heavy metal band as well, as they were part of that whole scene and were playing the big shows out there with all those new wave of British heavy metal bands from 78, 79, 80, 81, that whole new wave of British heavy metal. So really this one is kind of a second wave, but still, it fits because it's 1979. But I mean, there's no doubt that songs like NARITA and Road Racin', I mean, heavy song for this. I mean, kind of pushing the boundaries of speed metal with that song. 49er, their over-the-top cover of Born to Be Wild. Of course, nobody does a better cover of Born to Be Wild than Raven, in my opinion, but there's still, this is a really cool cover of Born to Be Wild. White Rock, Hot for Love, fantastic album. All right, so we are at number 3. Yes, number 3. I really could have put this one at number 2. Really could have put it at number 1, to tell you the truth. And I could have gone with a lot more from this band as well, from their 70s catalog, but German band, the Scorpions, this is taken by force. Uli Roth era Scorpions to me is the best era of Scorpions. I mean, I like the 80s stuff, I like stuff beyond that a lot, as a matter of fact, but Uli era is just something very special. You just don't hear a lot of bands that sound quite like them. Uli had a very, excuse me, a very distinct sound, a very distinct style that was definitely influenced by Jimi Hendrix, but it's not like these guys sound like the Jimi Hendrix Experience whatsoever. Yeah, Taken by Force, fantastic album. There's just no doubting songs like We'll Burn the Sky, Steam Rock Fever, The Sails of Charon. I mean, these are all just brilliant heavy metal songs from the 70s. He's a Woman, She's a Man, a song that was covered by, who did that song? A few different bands have done that song, but one of them is like stuck in my head right now. Who was it? I think a Heretic. Nope, that's not right. Halloween? Nope, wasn't Halloween. Dadgummit, don't you hate when you have a song stuck in your head and you can't remember who it is? But anyhow, Hellstar. It was Hellstar did a cover of He's a Woman, She's a Man. Alright, number 2, number 1. Both these bands, to me, defined heavy metal, not only in the 70s, but into the 80s and forever. Could have gone with any of their albums from the 70s, but Black Sabbath, I went with Master of Reality for several reasons. I love the first 2 albums, but something I've discovered while kind of doing some research for this video was the first 2 Sabbath albums. I always thought they were tuned down at least a half step to D sharp or E flat, and I was wrong. Those 2 albums are standard E tuning. After years of touring, and because of Tony Iommi having issues with his fingers from the factory accident he had when he was a teenager, they started down tuning just to make it easier on his fingers, and it gave him a heavier sound. Then down tuning became a regular thing for, especially for thrash bands. They tune a half step down to D flat or E flat or D sharp, whatever you want to call it, and then death metal bands would be tuning full steps, 2 steps down even, so yeah, detuning became a part of heavy metal. But regardless, this album is just brilliant. But much like all the other 70s stuff I've shown, it's a musical tapestry. It's not just, pound you over the head with heavy riffs from opening to end. There's more mellow moments. There's acoustic moments on here. There's kind of jazzy interludes. There's a little bit of everything going on here. But then you've got pure heavy metal and songs like Sweet Leaf, Into the Void, Children of the Grave. That's all classic stuff. So anyhow, Black Sabbath, Master of Reality. Like I said, could have gone with Black Sabbath, could have gone with Paranoid, Volume 4, Sabotage. Any of those albums could have fit into this very easily. Black Sabbath definitely were the forefathers of heavy metal, in my opinion. Recording stuff like this back in the late 60s, early 70s. What was this album? 71? So yeah, that's pretty early. Obviously, it's earlier than Deep Purple's Machine Head, but right around the same time as In Rock, I believe. And number 1 for me, no contest for me. This album made me. I mean, I was already a fan of heavy music in the 70s as a kid, but when I heard this album, Stained Class by Judas Priest, I was enthralled. I bought a copy of Sin After Sin at a used record store in a dollar bins, and the reason it was in a dollar bins is because inserted into the Sin After Sin cover was Stained Class album. I didn't know that when I bought it. I was just a kid, literally a kid. Bought it for $1, took it home, put it on. Didn't take me long to figure out that, these songs don't match the cover. But regardless, a song like Exciter, I mean, that is just pure traditional heavy metal, and a blueprint of what would come in the 1980s with the entire new wave British heavy metal movement, the U.S. movement, even into the stuff like speed metal and thrash. There's that song and this album kind of helped fuel that fire. But yeah, you got great stuff on here, like Stained Class, Invader, Saints in Hell. Faint's Warning does an incredible cover of Saints in Hell. The moody, dark Beyond the Realms of Death, White Heat Red Hot. It's fantastic album. Again, I could have gone with Sinatra Sin. I could have gone with you know, Hellbent for Leather. I could have gone with any of those albums, and it would have perfectly fit. But for me, it's Sinatra, my #1 pick. So there you go. That is my top 10 1970s albums that define heavy metal. Part 2 is going to be coming soon. Like I said, 40 people. I think I've got at least 25 answers, but I've got a lot of people who did the same one, so I'm going to put them in order by who got the most votes. So appreciate you watching this video. Hope you'll check out the second video as well. Do leave your comments below. I want to know what would you pick? What would be your pick? Either your top 10 or even just your #1 pick for the album that defines heavy metal in the 70s. Thanks for watching. God bless. Stay strong.